How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Olivier Gonzalez here. And today, I'm going to finally dive deep into the CSS positioning, relative and absolute layout as a way to understand and describe is the story behind that. Why this is important? Because based on my own experience, and I think that it might help to you, but it's up to you to put that at practice to see that it worked for you, is that I make sense of the world through stories. So when I describe now the CSS fundamentals, the anatomy of this, and then the things that are relevant in 2025 in web development, right? That we need to know, and then now build our knowledge of how now CSS actually works, the rendering logic, and then but the rendering logic is by understanding is that who actually makes that, which is the browser, and what the browser actually have. This is known as the user style sheet that allows you to now pass down or inherit certain properties in your styles, right? Most of the time is text based, among others. And when you have now these different CSS styles with the same specificity, how now the CSS resolve them, known as the CSS cascade. And what is this? Which is a tier of it's a cascade model to that has several tiers. So the further you fall into the cascade, the less likely it for that style to be applied. So you have now importance in the first tier, the importance, the transitions, the animations, and on the second tier you have is where is this code is located. It is at the application level, or the user level, or at the browser level. And then now is what is the specificity of the selectors. You can think of this like the name of that you put to a specific selector, right? So if they have the same name, so how now CSS actually solve those, right? So they say, hey, if this is based on an ID, or if this is based on a class, a pseudo class, or attribute, or if this is now a tag or a pseudo element, right? Again, the further it fall into this, the less likely it for those styles to be applied. And the last tier is the order. At which position in that CSS code is your competing rules. So if that is at the bottom, if that is at the top, it is less likely to be applied. If that is at the bottom, it is more likely to be applied. So, and also is to now understand that when it comes to see what CSS is all about, which is the presentation layer, that is how our content is going to be shown to the user. We need to understand is that traditionally the way how this code has been shown is like in the Western cultures, from left to right, and top to down. This is known as the inline directions that follow the flow of the that follow the reading flow, and then you have the top down, which is how all of these different words stack next or above each other. But because now the web is so vast and it is built by humans and is now open to different cultures, it now has been served to different cultures. So for example, Middle East doesn't read the way we do in Western cultures. So they go from left to right, and not to mention with hand-based characters or Asian characters, right? Where they read content not true, or that's not something that you see a lot of in websites, all right? Uh, but the style exists, which is from top down, top down, and right left, right? So because of this different ways to present content, right? Traditionally, we have uh, properties that allow to do that based on its position, but now it is based on its logical reading flow, known as the inline and block directions. So anytime that you want us to align a particular content, instead of using now, for example, margin or padding, top, bottom, left or right, okay, we use now is the margin inline or margin block, all right? So we have now this logical property that is the main selling point is that is that reach now more audience. Uh, so now our website can reach more audience. So understanding how the content is now being served across different cultures, right? It also is important to understand that how now CSS is all about, which is it's going to take all of these elements that you have in your document, in the DOM, right? And it's going to now create is a virtual representation in a box-like way for any of this virtual media, right? So whether it is print, media, and also for speech synthesizers. That's something that is mind-bending. Again, that go beyond the scope of today's video. You can take a look at the CSS spec, but the CSS spec describe that. But what we care in this video is that those elements, right, in the DOM, whether it's a div or an input, a section, so on and so forth, actually now the way how CSS represents that, the designers of the CSS, they say, hey, let's make everything a box, right? So by using is the box model, which is the way how now we look at all of these different elements and understanding the anatomy of the box model, which is made of the content, the padding, and how now the padding here has it is particularly way of describing is the gap between the content and the border. In these different layers, you can think of them as when you do a winter walk, all right? So you put, of course, a coat on top of your clothes, right? And each one of those layers actually is representing something. So, for example, the content is yours. You are the content. The padding is the fluffy material in your coat, right? The border is the thin line material that is sometimes is made of polyester or some sort of polystyrene as well. And now you have is the outside wear, right? So usually we have or we have a personal space of 2 meters, right? Roughly like that, or 6 feet, right? But the point is that all of these different layers that I mentioned before is the same, or is a good analogy of how the box model works. And this is important to understand these fundamentals, because based on this is what we're going to build our knowledge about how can we now is using this model, this concept, the box model, how can we now create is layouts, all right? So the box model, it is made, as I mentioned before, made of the padding, We also look at the different way of how can we describe the padding, right? And the shorthand as well. And that the padding is using is to add gap to the content, not to move the content, right? The border is something that has a particular syntax, not the same as the padding. The border allows us is to describe is how it's gonna look like, the color and the width, also the corner of this box. And you also have a property called outline that is not part of the box model, but is used to provide is accessibility, aka where you are currently at, right? So again, this might go beyond of today's video, but accessibility is something that also have its own guidelines, the web content accessibility guidelines that follow is these 4 principles, which is the principle of hey, if this perceivable, is this operable, is this understandable, and the solution that you're doing is robust, right? It's future proof. So, but in any case, also I look at the margin, right? And how the margin here it is used to add now gap between boxes, right? Between sibling elements. So if we now explore this, right? So if we take a look at the course in itself, okay? Which is this with the margin, okay? And we can do wacky things with wacky things with margin, like pull an element outside of a pattern or center itself within its container. This is 2 interesting stuff that you can do with margins, right? We first look at the syntax with margin top, bottom, blah, 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 and also how you can use that with this way of reading, this logical way of reading content, whether it is the blog or the inline, okay? And also how you can use these negative margins, which is with padding and border only positive numbers. So it allows you to now is pull an element outside if it is padded. So for example, in this case, like this. So negative margins can also put an element sibling closer. Exactly. So it can not only is put an element, put a children element out of the pattern flow, but also sibling elements out of it, right? And you might wonder, how is this possible, right? How is that margins allow you to now is, in this case, make this wacky stuff? Okay. How does that allow you to make all of this wacky stuff? That interesting. This is the interesting thing is that these 2 black boxes, they follow the deep pink box up. When we use margin to tweak an element's position, we might also be tweaking every subsequent element as well. This is different from other method of shifting an element's position, like using transform and translate, which we'll cover later. If you're keen to learn more about the intrinsic of negative margins, check out this in-depth by Peter Paul Koch. Negative margins. And he's writing a CSS book here. The layout, the content, the selectors. Oh, so he's reading. Okay, so he's writing a interesting. What is CSS? Browsers and CSS, HTML, progressive enhancement, static, syntax and including CSS. Part 2 selectors. Basic selector, functional selectors, user action selector, tree structure, input, miscellaneous, pseudo elements and nesting. In part 3, values and the cascade. Values, initial values and inheritance, the cascade, specificity, layer, scope, style, custom property, and architecting your CSS. Canvas and viewport, pixels, view, zoom in, dimensions, font size, media queries, and container queries, and layout, the flow, the box model, overflow, grid, flexbox. So right now we are looking is at the flow, and we'll also look at the box model, right? An overflow, something we're gonna see that later, the grid, the flexbox, display, the position, the C index and miscellaneous, and part 6, text styling, which is something that we described early as well, right? So okay, all right. Yeah, this is if you want to dive into the negative margin here, but again, margins allow us to do some wacky stuff here. So for example, is align, put elements out of the flow. All right. Let me see if I write this here. Do I have that? Oh, that makes a lot of sense because I didn't add that. Okay, let's actually add this. Exactly. So margins, right? Margins here. So finally, the third in our trinity is margin. Margin increases space around an element and it gives some breathing room. So margins increase the space around an element, giving some breathing room. As we saw earlier, margin is personal space. As we saw earlier, margin is like personal space, right? So in some ways, margin is the most amorphous and mysterious. It can do wacky things. With it, we can do wacky things. All right. So for example, like pull an element outside of the patent, like pull an element outside of a patent, or center an element using outer, or center an element itself, or center itself within its container, exactly, or center an element in a container. So here we were looking is at the syntax, right? This is space boxes, asymmetrically space boxes, individual specified boxes, and logical boxes, right? Some of the syntax. Some of the syntax, which is this. This looks pretty. This look very familiar to padding. The syntax for margin looks an awful lot like padding. This looks very familiar to padding. right? So not only this, okay, and also that you have now shorthand properties for that. I think we're gonna see the in the padding exactly. Okay. We can and also follow the shorthand properties like padding. Okay. So not only this is that one of the wacky things that allows to do margins is pull an element outside of that. Okay. So, so margins. So margins, or in this case, is negative margin. Okay. So with negative margins, okay, one of the wacky things that we can do here. One of the wacky things we can do is to pull an element not only from a pattern like the example below. All right, we can put now an example to do so, right? So not only like the example below, but also pull an element sibling closer. But also pulls an element sibling cancel. But also pulling sibling elements out of it, or pulling sibling elements closer. Siblings elements, putting sibling elements closer. So for example, like this, right? So this is one, okay? So it is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that margin is exclusively about changing the select element positions. Really, so it is about changing the gap between elements. Okay? The reality is that margin is about changing the gap between elements. Okay? And don't take my for do that for yourself. Negative margin shrink the gap below an element, causing the next element to scoot up closer. Finally, negative margin can affect the position of all siblings. And finally, in a negative margin can affect the positions of all negative the position of all so a negative margin can affect the position of all siblings. So for example, as it is, so not only that you are affecting is that particular box, but also anything that is inside of that box. So for example, like in this case, right? So for example, like this case, right? Okay, good, good. So if you want to check, if you want to know more about this, and you want to know more about the intricacies, okay? So check out this deep in article. So check out this deep in-depth article by Paul to know about the inner mechanism of negative margin. Okay, and then you have now auto margins, right? And then you have now auto margins. You dig? So another thing, another trick, okay? So another trick we can do with margin is to align elements to the center, or is to use to center elements, right? So another trick we can do with margin is to center a child in a container. Okay, center child content is to center child content in a container. So aka that not only that this is what it is, all right? So for example, is here you are actually centering is the content here. But if you, for example, put now 120 pixels, it's going to now align to that container, right? So here is using as a display block to take all the available space here. You're now specifying is the width to this box, and also you're saying, hey, margin left and auto that I want you to center that. So let's take a look to what happened when we use auto in margin, and that is, well, let me do this, right? Diggy. Okay, and so if we inspect the elements here, right, we're gonna see that auto seeks to fill the maximum available space here. So if we exactly, we're specifying is now 50%, but it's okay, 50. Things won't change that much. It's not dramatically the change here. Okay, it's not that dramatic here, that change here. So for example here, and if we inspect now in our dev tool, check out the dev tools to inspect what's going on. In here, the auto value seeks to fill the maximum available space. It works the same way for width property, as we'll discover shortly. Okay? So the auto, so for example here, is trying to do that. So the auto is trying to fill, no, the auto is trying to fill the maximum space available, or the maximum available space. Okay, and it works the same, and it work the same like auto for width property, right? So hey, I'm going to now take is all the available space when you use now margin here. This only works for horizontal margins, all right, and this only works on elements with an explicit width, all right. There's two caveats here. However, there are two caveats here. Two caveats here, which is only works, right? This only works so this only works for the horizontal margin. Setting top margin auto is equivalent to setting it like 0 pixels, and this only works on elements with an explicit width. You can also center elements inside of a container like this if you specify now the height, right? Let's say 120 pixels. All right. But again, if you do this, all right, so if you say, for example, now something like this, and on the outside wrapper, which is the main, if you outside, you specify now the height, all right, if you close his, right, and then you try to now, because we're talking is only about, okay, we're talking about is now margins here. Okay, it only works for horizontal margins and explicit too. And this is now an example of how you can actually center that particular elements here. So for, I don't remember, what do we want to center here? Oh, if you want to apply now negative margins here, we can now apply is to achieve this effect is to say, hey, let me now apply this to H1 and now pull the content up there, which is to the H1s we can say, hey, margin top of minus 32 pixels, right? So it's gonna pull the content up. We can say, hey, 3 root M. And in this case, because we are working is with the position of these elements, not with the font size, we prefer to go with pixels. We can say, hey, 42, for example. And we achieve now that particular result, right? something like this, is to reproduce the following effect, right? So we actually now moving is all of this sibling negatively, right? So we're moving is outside of the pattern element in our case. Applying is negative margins. Okay, so this is now kind of the exercise here that we can do here. I really love about this particular example here. So for example, exercise of thinking outside of the box. When you're trying to achieve this kind of style here, all right. And this is the style here. And how the thing is gonna look like, right? And the other is that how we can now stretch content here. Text remain padded and image extend the edge. Stretch content. This is another exercise. So this is thinking outside the box. All right. Thinking outside the box. Okay. And the other is stretch content available. So for example, like this. Image extends to the edge and text remain padded here. Is this. So how can we now achieve this particular effect? All right. We have the style here. Now we have the HTML, and we also have our style here, right? And this is how it's going to look like, right? Okay. And this is how it's going to look like, right? So how do you go and try to achieve this effect, right? Because if you because based on this structure here, you have now the div, the paragraph, the div, the paragraph, the image, and all the paragraph here, and then you want to now is, well, make this content take all the available space, extend to the edge, right? So in order to do this, and because this is wrapped now into a car here, that actually is now adding is this padding, okay? And of course, if we say image display block with 100%, it won't work. So what we can do here is to wrap this element. So there are several ways to achieve this only using what we have learned so far, okay? Whether it's adding is a particularly whether it's saying this sibling content that is here, I want to now is extend is only this, right, to take all the available space. So because this is our image here. If we say, hey, please expand now to the edge, so by stretching the content here, which is kind of interesting, if you say, hey, I want to apply now is a exactly I want to grab this box and now stretch that, right? How so? By saying is I want to apply negative margins to one edge and to the other. So in this case, if I say margin, negative margin to the left, 32 pixels, is going to pull now this image on the other side, which is work as expected. But if we say now I want to take the margin of the right to -2 or to 32, what will be the expected behavior here? Well, that is also is somehow now moving that element in that direction, or now expanding that elements in that direction. But it seems that this doesn't work as you might think, and you may wonder, all right. So margin left -32 and margin right -32. So if we explore about this, right? If we explore about these particular elements and what's going on here, we're telling these elements, hey, I want to apply now this margin. So align these elements to this margin here, right? You can do something like this. Margin right. Okay. So margin right. -32. I think it is. This is if we want to apply now negative margin 2 there. It's interesting that it only apply is to that. Margin right. Okay. It seems that it's only applying is in this. Alright, it's not moving to the right, but it's moving the element to the left. So it seems that our intuition here doesn't actually match that, right? Our intuition here doesn't actually match that. And if we want to expand the content here, we'll need to do something else. All right, we'll need to actually do something else, and that something else, all right, is to say, hey, I really want to take that image. Okay, we're calculating is the width based on its padding component, but I do want is to somehow is calculate the width is based on its upper component, right? Or avoid this here. Or in this particular element, that's going to get rid of this. Or I want to stretch the content here. So I know that I can move the margin here, okay, the elements from one direction and another, in this case in the right, but not in the right, so not in the left. So the content actually doesn't behave as we expected. So margin left here, by saying 32 pixels, is actually behave as expected, right? But if we say now margin right, I want to move now in another dimension, right? If I say margin right is minus 32, the browser doesn't recognize that. But what it's recognizing is the margin left here. Okay, so actually it's moving these elements out of the normal flow. Okay, it's moving these elements out of the normal flow. The elements is going to remember is the width. All right, this is if we say auto. Now it say, hey, I'm gonna take is what is the width of the entire image. So the it's taking all the available space of that image. All right, which in our case that might not work as expected, right? So if we say now the auto for that, so if we say auto, right, is now taking all the available space here of that particular image. Despite that, if we move now the elements here, margin right or margin left to minus 32 pixels, it will now be part of this. But again, it overflow the content. So how can we make sure that they actually work as expected? Based on what the thing that we have, based on things that we have looked so far, right? About that siblings are pull over the content and the auto margins. So it turns out that if we use now width, and if we say, hey, I want to now align the elements here, say margin auto, all right, and say, hey, this is will be 100%. So what I can do here is to wrap this element here, okay, to somehow now is not be affected by this, all right. So not be affected by the width of the pattern, okay. So there's a couple of things that we can do here, right? One of them is, hey, let's go into now is apply. We can do something like this. So instead of having a car here that is going to apply, we can say is something like this. So if you find now a paragraph, all right, okay, this is it. So I want to apply is this content to paragraph only, all right. So I can say now, hey, I'm going to apply is I can remove this here, all right, and I want to apply is this content only to paragraph, right? Right, and now achieve that, okay. Where actually we kind of achieve that thing, that behavior. But in our case, because what we can do is, all right. What we can do is, hey, if this is the first on tab, say this is the first of type, all right. If this is the first of type, I want to apply now is this pattern, right? But I want to do is pattern top down. So top right, bottom left, okay, and I want to do this also is for, and if I do, for example, this is the last of type. All right, I can say, hey, padding, in this case, the top will be 0 pixels, but the other dimension will be now is 32 pixels and 32, right? So the bottom will be 32, and this is how you can now achieve that particular behavior. You might wonder, hey, but this doesn't actually look like kind of what we have. This is how it looked like before, right? This is how now it looks like after, right? Before, after, right? So it actually is now maintaining is this. So this is one way of how you can actually achieve this behavior. Okay. Hey, the only thing that I want to do here is that I'm going to apply now this particular padding to only these elements, and now I want affect is the padding of these elements, right? This might be one solution to solve this particular problem. Okay. The other is to wrapping this into a container, right?
All right, the last exercise in this series, stretched content. So the idea with this one is we have this card that we've been seeing before, still has some text in it, but now we've added a cute photo of an otter. And what we want is that this photo, and really any child that we choose, should be able to extend all the way to the edge of the card, while the other children, like the text, are still constrained by the padding. And one way to do this is just to remove the padding from the card, and to add padding to the paragraphs, right, all the things that we want. But that's kind of a pain, especially because you imagine in like a regular article, you might have a lot more paragraphs than images that you want to stretch. And really, it doesn't really jive with my mental model.
Hola, buenos días.
Buenas.
Which is the card has padding, but certain children are able to kind of break free of that. So if we look at what we have kind of to start with, we have
break free, man. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The idea is to make the image breaks free while preserving the padding of the text content, right?
padding, but certain children are able to kind of break free of that. So if we look at what we have kind of to start with, we have another playground. And it has the photo of the otter already in it, but that photo is aligned within the text. It's not stretched. So I think what many people probably start with, what you think you need to do, is the same negative margin trick. So we have this image, and let's just say that we give it margin left minus 16 pixels, margin right minus 16 pixels, or actually 32 because that's what's on the card. And we've solved it for the left edge, but now the right edge of our card is even further away. And it's because we have this width 100% on the image. And images are weird. They're replaced elements. So the image itself isn't part of like the DOM. It's kind of a foreign object that we're embedding in the DOM. And if
Mm-hmm. So images are weird because they are not part of the DOM. They are what?
if I
Exotic
part of
objects?
like the DOM, it's kind of a foreign object.
Hola, ¿cómo están?
Hola, buen día, Sandra.
Hola, buenos días, Sandra, ¿qué tal?
Buen día.
Buenos días. No.
Hola.
So images are weird
Deme un segundito que no me están dando.
because they're not part of the DOM. They are
So the image itself isn't part of like the DOM. It's kind of a foreign object.
Mm-hmm. Is kind of a foreign object. That's
That we're
interesting.
embedding in the DOM.
That we are embedding into the DOM.
And if I don't give
¿Han podido hacer algo? Vi, Pablo, tu documento, la verdad, buenísimo.
Todo también generado con IA. O sea, la idea fue empezar un poquito en base a lo que estábamos trabajando con los chicos de producto, tratar de armar algo.
I'll be right back. And we're back. I changed the outfit a little bit because I have a meeting, but here we are. Okay.
give it a width, then the image takes up its natural size, which in this case is
Exactly.
way too big for what we want. So how do we do this, right? For folks who have a little bit more experience, you might think to use calc, but there is a way for us to do this that doesn't involve any fancy tricks that we'll see later in the course. For now, the way to do it is to use a wrapping element, and it's really kind of a good idea anyway, because images being replaced elements, we don't really want to use them like for layout concerns like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap around.
Yeah, in my case, what I did is just working with the solution that actually see fits, right? And targeting is all of these particularly components and how they behave.
Into this image, I'm going to give it a div, and I'm going to call it stretched out. And of course,
So the other is that wrapping this element that is going to now take is 100% of the width, not of the car, okay?
you could name it something less silly if you prefer. And the idea is the container is going to do the stretching, and then our image is just going to fill that container.
So if the container is going to do the stretching, right? How? Oh, wait a single moment. So one solution here is this. So solution one is that by using that particular element, right, and the CSS, and the solution, exactly, solution one. So use first and last end type CSS selector, okay? This is one. The other solution is to wrap that. Solution two is to wrap the content, wrap image into a container. But it's because how now this image works, okay? But it's not how this image works, and they are not. So images are weird because they're not part of the DOM. It is kind of a foreign object there. It is kind of a foreign object that we are embedding into the DOM. So if images are not like objects, it is kind of embedding there, we can now call a class with a silly name to say stretch, stretch out, right? Where now here, okay, this component called stretch out is going to do the stretching here. And remember that we are wrapping this box here, that we are adding now this pattern, okay? We wrap this inside of our image here, okay? And it's this container, is this box that is going to stretch out here. So if we say margin left minus 32 pixels and margin right minus 32 pixels, it actually is not a pixel. It actually is doing this. That's interesting, because now with negative margin you can stretch out containers. That is pretty fucked up. Okay, stretching out stretching out a container. And stretching out a container here. That is a mind-bending stuff here. Exactly, and now it behaves the way how our intuition has developed. So this box, and you have only content in there when this is not an image, because it's behaved like an exotic object, like a foreign object. Okay, so when you do this, your wrapping is this and say, hey, let me stretch this, so you can stretch the content out here. Holy shit.
So now going back to the CSS, give us a new definition for this class, pull these styles out, right, the margin left and right, and then let's put our width 100% back on this. And that's...
If you put now width 100%, that'll work. If you put now width as auto, is take all the available space of this image. It's taking the natural width of this image. But it's not. We only take is the 100% from the width pattern, which is, in our case, the stretch content here.
That's our solution right there. The stretched out is now this reusable element too, right? And we don't really have another example here, but you can imagine if I wanted to, maybe I want this paragraph over here to do the same thing. I apologize for my lack of care for spacing. With these styles now, I've taken this second paragraph and kind of done the same thing. And granted, that doesn't look very good. We wouldn't really want to do that. But the point remains that if we had a video, if we had a little embedded widget, we'd be able to just wrap around this stretched out class and have that behavior wherever we need it. So that's the solution, right? Our stretched out class has that margin, which allows it to break free of the padding, and then our image just fills that available space. So our
Exactly. So the stretched out are allowed to break in or break free. Okay. So or now containers are allowed to break free that space. They're allowed to break free that constraints, and now our image are going to fill all the available space in that container.
Stretched out.
This kind of little nuances that happen here is why you are getting paid for, why you pay for your content. So after we went through understanding is now the box model with the pattern, the border, the outline that is outside of the blocks, the box size, and the margin that have some wacky behaviors, especially is on you can pull out elements of a parent, okay, and you can center elements horizontally, or you can center children horizontally. So as we explore now how to work with negative margin, that not only is pulling is one element, not only is pulling is a child from a parent, but also is pulling is all of its siblings, elements, right? And in the case of align with auto in margins, and the auto property means that let me take all the available space in only the horizontal dimension, right? So I mentioned this is because that once we know how this box model works, and because now CSS is more like a set of mini language rather than a language in itself, where each one of those mini language is based on a layout algorithm that you now apply to a box. And those boxes are going to be in those boxes now depend of the layout algorithm that you want to go with, whether it is the normal flow, the position absolute, the relative the position relative, absolute, flexbox, grid, float, and overflow, right? Because of that, now that makes a lot of sense. So here we're only looking is at the normal flow in this video. Okay, we're looking is at the normal flow. Okay. We're looking is at the normal flow, which is one of the way of how you can create layouts here. So the normal flow has so the anatomy of the layout of the normal flow is that you have now three types of blocks. So you have now the block, you have now the inline, and you have now the inline block. That makes a lot of sense. So the block elements actually takes all the available horizontal space. It is greedy. It doesn't line break elements, or it doesn't line break the content. All right. In the inline elements, it only takes only the available width content. There's some nuance with that because, for example, image, video, and canvas, despite that they are technical inline elements, you can modify its dimensions, and there's some special edge case with these elements, particularly the image, that add this magic space only in the flow layout. And the way how you can remove that is, well, always put your images close to each other in the markdown, and also is the to remove this line height elements or this additional spacing on the top of this image. You use is line height to set that to 0, because it's treating, the browser is now treating is those image like a text. That's what happened. And then you also have is the inline block. So this is known as the wolf in lamb's clothing, aka an inline element or a block in inline clothing. Internally it behaves like a block, externally as an inline. right? So you can modify these dimensions, and it won't break the flow out of that. But you can line break elements here, and this is when we're starting to play with how you can now is yeah, work with these layouts here or these elements here. Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So, as we look at this layout and how now is these boxes are calculated, whether it's the width and the height. In terms of the width and the height, you have now two type of units. You have the measurement, pixels, rems, and percentage, and then you have the keywords. So for the width, the percentage, it is based on its pattern size element, right? So width by default, when you run a specify, is going to look up the tree, right? And as we explore is the keywords, so for example, like min content, max content, and fit content. So min content is only takes so min content is calculating is the mean width based on the widest children's elements, right? Whereas the max content is calculating is based on the smallest children elements in an unbreakable change. So it won't break the line here. And the fit content is, as the name suggests, is to fit down that content. So I also look at some couple examples of this, especially is that how you can now achieve some sort of behaviors like with properties and with the displayed, right, inline element and so on and so forth. Just to see how this actually works. And in the case of the height, which behave by default pretty much like the mean content, it's look at by default it is by default the smallest value is or the height is by default the smallest values possible that fit that contents element. So when you use now percentage like mean height or height, and it actually doesn't match is the intuition, is because most of the time, or it's because that the container or the height of that container is actually looking down on the children's to compute it is height by default. So because now height by default is look down the tree to compute it, in order to solve this issue, to get now the entire mean height available, or the height that we want to, we need to specify that at the root element, at the HTML root element, and pass down that height to all the subsequent elements onto the target element. So in other words, as we explained in something that we can see in that example here, is that by passing down is the height percentage down to the element that we care, a lot of the time we actually now, and this is the way of how we can inherit this value. So that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. But a lot of sense. But a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is what the width and the height algorithm is working, and then, so if you want to if you're working with frameworks like React or Next, there's some property that it actually behaves the same, HTML in the body, and then specific selector that they're using to actually inherit that. You're going to pass down that height to the entire application. And also is that you can use is some particular unit like SVH unit or V height, viewport height. But unfortunately, in the mobile sphere, because the address bar and the footer actually are now part of the viewport, right? This actually makes your content now, when you just load it, taller on the initial screen or on the initial load. So to prevent this, we can use is or the percentage to inherit now this 100% and pass down to the elements, or we can use this new unit called small view height, viewport height, that actually is on Android or iOS Safari mobile browsers. It's taking is the viewable area as the height. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense here. And a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. But what about that footer? So we look at that particular example here and how to compute that and how we shouldn't do this, just to see that this is actually quite possible. All right. But what do we really care about is the margin collapse. Okay. That's what we really care about this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with margin collapse is just talking about that this personal space that we use as an analogy to mention that uh, which is like 6 feet or 1.8 meter personal space. You don't need to actually is uh, have a 12 feet of personal space with another person. They can actually now be until certain range, aka margin collapse. Now is the idea that margins side by side collapse into the same space. The concept is pretty simple, but it involves in a lot of edge cases here that quite frankly it is quite hard to grasp at first hand, right? So the rules are, right now I'm just only paraphrasing that. So again, remember that margin collapse only on the flow layout, and that is only vertical margins collapse. All right. If you take in consideration that when this was created, because the normal flow layout actually was conceived, so CSS wasn't intended to be used for layouts in the early days, and I do want to see if this is true, bro. On the following sentence. Mm-hmm. Well, I get it, man. In 1996, CSS1 press release explicitly stated that extended layout capability were planned for future specification, not part of CSS1 itself. The press release announced that CSS1 will be the foundation for forthcoming specification in areas including extended layout capabilities, speech style sheets, and web form. Mm-hmm. The World Wide Web Consortium issues cascading style sheet recommendations. CSS1 offers fast, easy to manage website look and feel. December 17, 1996. Today issue a recommendation for web style sheets. The recommendation cascading style sheet level 1 give web designers a robust set of tools to help them specify web page presentations properties such as fonts, colors, and margins. Okay, this is why the foundation of this is part of that. And also part of the things that are relevant in today's development, right? That is, well, that we need to know what CSS rules are, media queries. Mm-hmm. We need to know what CSS are, media queries. Okay, media queries, specific selectors that are still being relevant, colors, units, and fonts, right? Or typography. So Microsoft and other software vendors have products that support CSS1, Netscape, Adobe, SoftQuad, and Griff are among of the Web3C members who will be adding support to the CSS1 in their upcoming software release. With hypertext markup language, content providers do not have the control they have in print media over color. Content providers do not have the control they have in print media over color, text indentation, positioning, and other aspects of a style. Today, CSS offers a powerful and manageable way for authors, artists, and typographers to specify the visual representation of an HTML document or collections of documents. But it's a way to specify the visual presentation of an HTML document. This representation doesn't involve in anything. Exactly, because it was initially thinking in terms of fonts, colors, size, margin patterns, background property, and the foundational of box model. CSS2 added property for positioning that allows CSS to be used for page layout, introduce absolute, relative, and fixed positioning of elements here. So what CSS was originally intended for, according to Hakon Lee, CSS creator. Holy hell. Holy fuck. Mm-hmm. While working with Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Kailogan at CERN in 1994, he was the chief technology officer of Opera from 1998 until the browser was sold to new owners in 2016. Opera. How come View Lee attended to Oxford University West or Georgia College and MIT Media Labs, receiving an MS in Visual Studios in 1991. His PhD thesis provides a background on the origin of CSS and the rationale to some of the design decisions behind it, particularly as to why some features were not included and why CSS avoid trying to become document style, semantic, and specification language. Holy shit. Document style, semantics, and specification language is an international standard development to provide style sheet for SGML. Okay. Consists of two parts: a tree transformation process that can be used to manipulate the tree structure of document prior to presentation, and a formatting process that the associate elements in the source document with specified notes in the target representation. But is this thing is being used? Cascading and extendable style sheet language. Okay, holy moly. This is getting into the weeds, bro. So while working with Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Kailogan, he proposed the concept of cascading style sheet. As a showcase of testbed, he integrated CSS into the Arena web browser, which became the first CSS implementation. After joining W3C in 1995, he worked on the CSS spec, including CSS1, CSS2, RFC, and most of these specifications were developed with Barboss, who is considered co-creator of CSS. Over the next decade, CSS established itself as one of the fundamental web standards, with profound impact on typography, aesthetic, and accessibility on the web. Along with his work on the CSS specifications, Lee has been an activist for standards in general. In 2005, he wrote an open letter to Bill Gates of Microsoft asking why Microsoft Internet did not support common web standard. A few days later, when Bill Gates announced that Internet Explorer 7 will be launched, Wii U responds by launching the ACID 2 challenge to Microsoft. Although primary target of Microsoft, the ACID 2 test was also difficult for other browsers. Since then, ACID 2 and subsequent ACID 3 has been established and set as a benchmark test which all browsers are measured against. Holy hell. In 2006, Wii Lee started campaigning for browsers to support downloadable web font using common font format. In 2007, View Lee started campaigning for the video element to make it easy to publish video on the web at google.io. In 2011, View Lee presented the video element in combination with the web format with Google has open source. Okay. Holy hell. CTO of Opera Software. In 2013, Opera started a gradual transition from its own Presto web engine to the WebKit engine, also used by Safari and Google Chrome. Viewly say that it made most sense to work with the open source community than to continue developing its own engine. Chairman of Jest Logic. Wei Liu has been chairman of Jest Logic, the developer of Prince, in 2004. Prince used CSS to render HTML and as highly styled PDF with complex layout. Political and civic activism. He co-founded the Pirate Party of Norway. What? It's because at the end of the day, this politics is part of this. Pirate parties. Print with CSS. Print 16 convert HTML to PDF. Beautiful printing with simple CSS. HTML to PDF. E-publishing. Key features. PDF converter for Thomson Reuters, Tigmatic, Invitae, Automulch, ExxonMobil, Columbia University, and BU. Commercial site license. Prince is a high-end product, but the fees are reasonable and start around $2,000 per year for startups. Okay. It's like HTML to PDF. It is quick and simple to convert HTML to PDF with Prince. HTML is seamless, transforming to document you can print, download, and archive. E-publishing. Prince enables you to type, set, format, and print HTML content so you can be your own publisher. Dictionaries. Invoice. Oh, okay, this is the HTML. Okay. Attention to this one. And the other this is the PDF. Oh, and transform that into PDF. Exactly, your simple HTML to PDF. Textbooks. Textbook like this. HTML. That's an image. Okay, and then the PDF. But this is the newsletter now. And then the PDF. This particular image that look like shit. Okay, in scientific journals. And then to PDF. Okay, that's okay. This is getting into the okay. Exactly. This is getting into that. The ACID3 test is a web test page for the web standard project that checks a web browser's compliance with elements of every web standard, particularly the document object model in JavaScript. If the test is successful, the result of ACID3 test will display a gradually increasing fraction counter below a series of colored rectangles. It's a test and web page test for the web standard project that checks a web browser's complying with elements of various web standards, particularly the DOM and JavaScript. To pass the test, a browser must use its default settings. The animation has to be smooth and the score has to end 100%. And the final page has to look exactly, pixel for pixel, like this referencing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. If the text is successful, the result of the asset set will be displayed a gradual increasing of that. Mm-hmm. Bucket 1, DOM traversal, DOM range. Bucket 2, DOM core and DOM 2 events. Bucket 3, DOM 2 views, DOM 2 style, CSS 3 selectors and media queries. Bucket 4, behavior of HTML tables and form when manipulated by Scream and DOM 2 HTML. Bucket 5, tests from ACID competition, SVG HTML SMIL in Unicode. And bucket 6, ECMAScript. 0 subset pass, no rectangle show, 1 to 5, 1 to pi success task, black rectangle. 6 to 10 subset test pass, gray rectangle. 11 to 15 subtest pass, silver rectangle. All subset pass, color rectangle. Holy hell. And this is the standards test. HTTP 1 protocol. Oh, but they haven't updated that. Well, that's fine. That's fine. This is actually getting too deep into this. All right. That's good for interesting that, but remember that the CSS1 spec, though they have they forecast to implement at some point is layout. Initially, it was based only on the box model, the margins, the fonts, and the colors, right? That makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't intended to be used as layout, right? So the people writing the spec were imagining headings and patterns, not columns and sidebars. And that's our first very rule in margin. Only vertical margins collapse. Okay. The other is margin only collapsible in the flow layout. Only adjacent element collapse. The bigger margins wins. Nesting doesn't prevent collapsing. Margin can collapse in the same directions. So for example here, more than 2 margins can collapse. Exactly, more than 2 margins in the same position can collapse. So for example, here we got is a header. More than 2 margin can collapse. Okay. And the other is the negative margins here. Holy moly. Okay. But I do think that that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.